Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire supported by Glenlivet Books. Later tonight, when it's midday in the United States, Joe Biden will be sworn in Washington as the 46th President of the United States. So today we ask, what does the end of the Trump presidency and the start of the Biden presidency mean for India? My guest is the author of a magnum opus on India-US relations, which has recently been published, and here it is. The book is called A Matter of Trust. It's a study of India-US relations from President Truman in the 40s to President Trump just a day ago. And the author is my guest today. Her name is Meenakshi Ahamed. Meenakshi Ahamed, as I said, your book, A Matter of Trust, is a study of India-US relations from Trump to Truman, or rather the other way around. And the most interesting thing you do is to clearly establish that the low point in the relationship was when Nixon was president in the 70s. He was a man who actually personally abused our own prime minister at the time, Indira Gandhi. But since Clinton in the 90s, the relationship has been on an upward and improving trajectory. And today, in fact, the two countries consider themselves natural allies. As you look back on the span of 70 years that you've covered, are you surprised by this amity? Or in a sense, was it inevitable?
Well, I suppose it's inevitable when you think about how India has done so well economically recently. Ever since Prime Minister Rao's reforms and the emergence of India as an economic power, once you emerge as an economic power and you start becoming a major actor on the global stage, then you become someone that the world has to contend with. Once you become a central player, then of course you become, someone that everyone's going to want to interact with. So that, in a sense, you become someone that people adjust their relationships with. However, I can tell you that having studied all this, personalities have had so much to do with our relationships with the U.S. And I've discovered that it really took a leap of faith among certain leaders. Clinton really, when he first came to office, he had a real interest in India. And I was told by Strobe Talbot in an interview that I did with him that initially people were sort of surprised when he came in. He kept talking about India, and people were wondering, what's this obsession that he has with India? What's with India? And he, as a student, had read A Passage to India and had read some books about India, and he was sort of fascinated by India. And apparently, when he was governor of Arkansas, he used to sit around the kitchen table with Hillary, and they had this whole idea about going to India, looking at microfinance, looking at how villages work. And he was never able to do it because he had so much to deal with when he first arrived. So he sent Hillary to India, if you remember, on that trip. And she was sort of his eyes and ears, and came back. He actually never made it to India until his last year in office. So
Absolutely. But the important point you're making is that personalities determine relationships in a fundamental way.
But he may not have been able, but even though he was inclined towards India, he actually wasn't able to do anything about it. He sent Strobe.
Let's not get lost in Clinton, because that's 30 years ago. Let's come to today, because personalities and the impact they can have on a relationship is critical to the way the relationship developed between Trump and Narendra Modi. Modi went out of his way to befriend Trump. And for a lot of time, in India at least, there was talk about the rapport, the relationship between the Indian Prime Minister and the American President. Tell me, how successful was Modi in building a relationship based almost primarily on the strength of a personal rapport he'd established between himself and Donald Trump?
So I have to say that I have to give Prime Minister Modi a lot of credit here, because he has been incredibly astute, let's say, about trying to figure out each American president, and he's been able to assess what they're after. So he realized very quickly that Obama Obama had this one goal, which was climate change. And he decided that he was going to be a player. And he knew that in order to get Obama's attention and to put India on the map with Obama, because frankly, Obama had a lot on his plate. Remember when Obama came, the terrorism was an issue. There were a lot of issues. The banking industry was had collapsed. They were looking down the precipice in terms of the economic order of the world, and so India was not going to be on his priority list. But Obama in his second term had an agenda on climate change, and Modi became a partner, and so they. And Obama really appreciated that. So they became partners on this. He was very clever the way he played it. And then, well, Trump is not easy to figure out. He's got such a massive ego, and he's been talking incessantly about crowds and how big his crowd was at inauguration, how it was bigger than Obama's. I mean, he lies through his teeth. But anyway, Modi looks at this guy and says, okay, I know how to please him. And, when he came to Houston and he had that Howdy Modi event, he invites Trump, makes him a guest of honor. And, Trump is like overawed by the numbers. He just looks at the numbers and he's sort of quite overwhelmed by this. And he's very impressed. And he knows that when he comes to India, Trump has just been through an impeachment process. If he lays out the red carpet, he's going to have Trump eating out of his hand. And sure enough, Trump was really impressed.
Absolutely. Modi
really played him.
Modi found the key to how to play Trump and played him very successfully. But tell me this, in India, there was always a debate in India about the question, how important to Trump is India? What's your answer to that?
Let me just make one thing very clear about Trump. Nobody is important to Trump but Trump. And, for Trump, it's, he only his foreign policy was all about bilateral relationships. I just want to see what you can do for me. And he didn't have any strategic vision about the world, about foreign policy. It was just, are you good for America or are you good for me? And it was all bilateral. And, what's the trade balance? It was all about money, trade balance.
You're saying that if Modi hadn't found the key to Trump's personality, the relationship between America and India would not have become as close as it is at the moment. In other words,
remember, there's no loyalty. There's no loyalty. When it came, Modi goes after this whole layout. Remember when, he goes back, he makes comments to Modi about, well, I don't know, India's not handling his COVID well, or I want when Modi was technically not allowed to give the medicine, chloroquine out because he technically has to save it for his, I think there's some, the regulations in India where you have to keep it in India. And Trump started bullying him on CNN by saying, well, India has to give it to us. And,
there's no doubt. Trump.
And then he says another thing, India's not good to us on trade. India's never been good to us on trade. I mean, he has no loyalty. He starts, barraging India about trade.
But let's move away from Trump. His chapter is ending. There is another one that begins, as I said in the introduction, at 12 noon in your city, which is late at night for us. Biden will be the 46th president. Now, the problem is that he takes over at an incredibly, unprecedentedly challenging time for any incoming American president. There's a raging pandemic. Your economy is in serious trouble. There's a deep racial divide that split the country almost in two. And now, worst of all, there is a sort of looming threat to American democracy from Trump's own supporters. So tell me, with all of this, how much time will Biden have for India?
Not much. And does it sound familiar? This is just this is like Obama. It's like when Obama arrived, he arrived in the middle of a crisis. There were two wars. The country was keeling over the precipice, an economic precipice. I mean, it was in terrible shape when he took over, and Osama bin Laden was at large. I mean, there was similar, very, very, major problems when Obama took over. So this is, Biden has been there before, let's put it that way. He's got, the only thing I can say is that he's got some of the same people back, and the country is in very, very safe hands because the people he's got are, I would say, outstanding. Biden knows India very well. He's an old, he's been around a long time. He knows all the issues. A lot of his people know the issues. You, Karan, interviewed Tony Blinken in 2015, an outstanding interview where Tony laid out his foreign policy vision. So you, of all people, know what his visions are and what his views are. But, Tony Blinken has been with Biden a long time. And
he's the Secretary of State. So tell me something, how much of Biden's India policy will be determined by the Secretary of State, who knows India, who understands India, and when he spoke to me, was deeply appreciative of the role India plays. So how much will India policy be determined by the Secretary of State?
I would say that Jake Sullivan and Tony Blinken will be pretty much, making that policy.
But there's something else that's true too. Biden was chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee when the Indo-US nuclear deal was going through, and he played a very supportive, cooperative, helpful role. Does that indicate that Biden is broadly sympathetic to India and will be helpful?
Yes, there's a great story there because, the nuclear deal was very interesting because the Democrats traditionally were like the Ayatollahs of the nuclear deal because they were the guardians of non-proliferation, if you recall, and none of them wanted this nuclear deal. Talk to Sham Saran or, Shiv Shankar Menon, they'll tell you that every time they went to speak to, then Senator Obama, they'd get a long lecture about non-proliferation. And even Hillary Clinton was reticent. So they knew that Biden was the head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. They knew that he was the key. If he agreed to the nuclear deal, everyone else would follow. But without him, it was going to be very difficult. They could get the Republicans on board. They could not get...
Can I interrupt? You're saying Biden was critical and Biden's support ensured that Clinton...
Biden's support would ensure the passage of the nuclear problem. And Tony Blinken was his right-hand man there. He was the senior staffer to Biden. And so he's been with him a long time. So this is a long history.
And hang on, let me interrupt. And did Blinken influence Biden on the Indo-US deal? Did Blinken play a role in ensuring that delivered?
I'm not 100%, but I'm sure he had a lot to do with it because remember, staffers write a lot of the papers. But in this case, I think it was Biden himself who grasped the idea that this was what was at stake here. And this goes back to the earlier discussion that we had about presidents who, who put their weight behind something. President Bush has to be given a lot of credit for putting the weight of the White House behind the relationship and improving. He was solely responsible for changing the trajectory between India and the US. And he put the weight of the White House behind it. Once Biden grasped that the nuclear deal wasn't just about nuclear cooperation, but about something greater, which was about changing the relationship between India and the US, he got it.
Okay.
And so he came on board. And someone I know who was intimately involved with the Indians who fanned out, they call the Indian community, the diaspora played a very big role in this. and the Indian ambassador called on the diaspora to do their job and to go out and try and
But once again, let's not get lost in the story of the nuclear deal. That is at least 13 years old.
I've read this intensive book, so I can't help it.
Illustration of Biden's commitment and, more importantly, Blinken's commitment to the relationship with India. But there is one other factor.
But they held fundraisers for Biden, and the Indians did.
So, hang on. Let me ask the question. One of the important factors that may change with the switch in president is the role India played in terms of China. Trump's antipathy to China played to India's advantage. Now, Biden clearly will want a different relationship with Beijing. So is there a danger that in terms of India's strategic importance, New Delhi may diminish under Biden?
No. And I'll tell you why. Now, the relationship that the US has with China is obviously going to be adversarial. That's a given. The pivot the whole pivot towards China to Asia took place in 2011 under Obama. This whole general shift away from Europe and towards Asia. And the balance between competition versus cooperation has been shifting, and it's become more of a, it's become more competitive, it's become more adversarial. Trump has certainly taken it more into that camp. Will Biden shift it back? At this point, from what I've seen, I don't think so. I think both Blinken and Jake Sullivan, who I'm a little bit in touch with, I don't think so. Here's what Jake says. He said, we have to follow Dean Acheson's approach, which is approaching it from a situation of strength. Okay. And what they're going to do is call on their allies in Europe. This is the first thing they're going to do. They're going to get their allies in Europe to try and arrange to have a dialogue of diagnosis.
But my question is in the process of reorienting the relationship with China. Will India lose its strategic importance?
I don't think so, because they want a basket of alliances towards China. They feel that, look, the US is 25% of the world's GNP, but with their alliances, it's 50%. And that's very powerful for them. So they think that if they have their alliances together against China, and India is very much a part of that basket, that then they can contain China. And they've seen the aggression in Hong Kong and in Kashmir recently, and they don't like what they see.
Okay.
And they feel that China has become ultra aggressive, and that under Trump they feel that China's been somewhat out of control.
Now, the other critical relationship that Delhi keeps an eagle eye on is Pakistan.
Oh, yeah.
Under Trump, Pakistan's cooperation was essential to extricating America out of Afghanistan. But nonetheless, Trump kept a lot of pressure on Islamabad in terms of terror. Will that alter under Biden, or will it stay much the same?
Frankly, I think that the pressure was there under Obama as well. And I don't think it was any... Trump is very mercurial, by the way, on in his approach to foreign policy and Pakistan. Remember, when he first came in, India was very happy because he suspended arms sales to Pakistan and he basically ignored them. And then he and Imran met at the White House and he thought he had a fellow traveler there. And so things changed. He's very mercurial with Pakistan. The whole Taliban thing is not
How will Biden be on Pakistan? That's the important.
I think it's Bill Blinken and Jake, and I think they will. I think that they're going to. I think it's going to be India first.
You're confident of that?
Yes. I don't think they're going to ignore Pakistan, but I think Pakistan, just remember, Pakistan's lost altitude with them because uh, they've been very disappointed with the way Pakistan's behaved in the past, and also because I think the military and certainly the officials have seen the duplicity with which the Pakistanis behaved. The most Pakistanis were the CIA, and now Bill Burns is going to head the CIA. So I don't know how much. I just don't see that the Pakistanis are going to have free reign anymore.
Okay. Now, unlike Trump, Biden has a huge moral commitment to democracy, to human rights. He's committed himself to holding a summit of democracies, and one presumes that will go ahead, although it may not be so easy for America to lecture the world about democracy and human rights after what happened in Washington a few days ago. But that apart, is it likely that Biden will bring up issues like India's treatment of Muslims, of Kashmir, of NGOs, even the media? Because all of those are perceived as issues that are Narendra Modi's Achilles heel. The more Biden stresses them, the less Mr. Modi will feel comfortable.
So I think that that the whole summit is under a bit of a cloud right now, for sure. And I think the world is in no mood to be lectured by America on democracy. I think democracy is under threat here. I think white nationalism is a big problem. Domestic terrorism is a big problem. So the US totally understands right now that it has its own issues. Having said that, this administration is hell-bent on trying, they're very idealistic lot. So I think they are going to be hell-bent on trying to restore the damage that Trump has wreaked. And I think they're going to try and restore American, quote unquote, values, democratic values, and its image. They understand that this summit is not a time when the world is going to be willing to listen to the US, but they are nonetheless going to try and build it back. Is this going to impact India? I think in the long term it will, because I do think if what they said to the Saudis is any indication, from I think it will. I think definitely they've already made comments about CAA and the treatment of Muslims. So I don't think that there's a free pass there. I do think that it's going to be done in a very diplomatic, maybe private way. So because they don't want to embarrass the Modi government in any way, given that the China is the bigger picture here, and they will want cooperation on China. And I think they see India as a partner, as an ally.
But you're saying a very interesting thing. There will be pressure on issues like treatment of Muslims, Kashmir, CAA, NRC, but it will be done privately, it will be done diplomatically, it will be done behind closed doors. So there will be pressure, but it will not be public.
Yes. And let me just mention something that one of his most senior officials told me when I was interviewing him for the book.
Who is the he? Who is the he?
I prefer not to say.
Well, I mean, it's meaningless to talk about this because we don't know who you're talking about. Whose official is it? An American, an Indian, the Prime Minister?
No, the American, one of Obama's top appointees. But he said that when I asked him, I said, how is it that, Obama was able to get along with Manmohan Singh and Modi, because they're so different, and they had slightly different attitudes and policies, certainly towards India's minorities and things. And he said, well, Modi was had so much energy, and he had the mandate of the people, and he had not revealed this side of himself when he first came in. Remember, Obama came in towards the beginning of Modi's tenure. So that he hadn't actually, he was very clever. He didn't actually, he knew
just
what
a
America.
moment, I'll stop you there because you're forgetting the town hall speech Obama made hours before he left India, where he reminded
At Shreveport. Yes.
India's constitution and its commitment to religious freedom. So clearly, Obama was aware of this side of Modi, but let's not get off Obama. I'm interrupting you because Obama is the past. I'm focusing on the future. Let's not spend time on the past. It's over.
Okay.
Narendra Modi made great use of the Indian diaspora, and he leveraged it to improve his relationship with America under Trump. What will be the role of the diaspora now that there's a new occupant in the White House? Will it be as useful, or will, and I noticed that Biden has got some 20 Indians in the administration. It's reported by PTI, 17 of them are in the White House itself. Or will the importance of the diaspora diminish because Biden will not be as keen to court it the way Trump was? So what's your assessment of the role of the diaspora hereafter going forward?
Well, Trump courted the diaspora, but remember, they didn't vote for him in the same numbers. I mean, the diaspora, I think the numbers are something like 80% of them voted Democratic. So that's, that tells you something. And there were a few people who were in the Trump administration, but the numbers that have gone in and in very senior positions into the Biden administration are staggering. So, I mean, it's just wonderful. So I just don't think there's any comparison. And if you look at the 4 congressmen, they're all Democrats.
So I think the diaspora's role in determining the relationship will grow?
So I think that, 60% of the immigrants, Indian Americans here, are India born. That tells me that half the Indian Americans are going to be keenly interested in what goes on between India and the US. There are now big networks here of people who raise money for political candidates. Any Indian running for office here, 99 Indians ran for office this past election. That's a lot. And there are political organizations that help them, and the Indian community is now very actively involved. So I think there's a lot of engagement, and as long as we have these huge numbers of Indians coming in on the H-1B visas, and we continue to have 60% of Indians who are born in India in this country, there's going to be a great deal of interest in the India-US relationship and what goes on in India.
Okay. My last question. The Vice President, Kamala Harris, is half Indian. How determining a role will she play in working out the Biden administration's India policy? Will she be critical or will she be peripheral?
My guess is peripheral. And for this reason, that she has come to this role primarily on her, being half Black. The Indian element, I don't think, has played as much of a role in getting the vote. And so I think her, the compliment that she adds to Biden is really the Black vote, the African American vote. And so I think she needs to be the vice president, the American vice president, not the Indian vice president. So she's going to leave the India-US relationship pretty much to Tony Blinken and Jake Sullivan and all the experts, people like that. She has an Indian person. She has someone who's now an India sort of person in her group. But
you're saying a very important thing that will perhaps come a little disappointment to the Indian audience hearing you. There's a lot of hope that with Kamala Harris as vice president, there will be her personal involvement in pushing the relationship with India further, and it might rise to another level. You're suggesting that's unlikely, that her importance in the eyes of the president, i.e. Biden, is as a half Black American, not a half Indian American. It's the Black vote that she brings in, and that's where she will be used most.
I think one thing to remember is that the great thing about her being half Indian is that it's sort of almost normalized the Indian role in American political life. And he's always teasing her, like when Vanita Gupta, when he was appointing her as one of in the Department of Justice, he sort of turned around and half laughingly said to her, she's the daughter of Indian immigrants. And he turned around to Kamala and said, sound familiar? And, so there's a lot of this back and forth, and the whole Indian thing has become sort of part of the sort of conversation now. As
another very important thing, Kamala Harris as vice president, because she's half Indian, has normalized the role of Indians in US public life. In other words, the greater role being played by Indians in Washington, in New York, or right across the country is now much more acceptable because a half Indian is almost right at the very top.
Yeah, and look at Ro Khanna. I mean, he's constantly, like when he challenged Nancy Pelosi and why she didn't take the $2 trillion, when she didn't take the initial stimulus package that was offered, he was quoted over and over again. He comes on Fox News. He represents Silicon Valley. It's one of the most important constituencies. He has every big honcho calling him.
That's a very important point you've made, and I think that is one that we should end on, that Kamala Harris as vice president will normalize the role played increasingly by Indians in America. No longer will it be looked upon as exotic or representation for minorities. It will increasingly look as if it is part of the mainstream of United States public life. And that's a very important, critical, in fact, change that her being vice president will bring about. Thank you very much for this interview, Meenakshi Ahamed, and thank you in particular for waking up so early in the morning to join us. I should share a secret with the audience. It's 5 a.m. in America and a terribly early hour of the day on a cold winter's day. Take care.
Nothing for you, Karan. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.